12 o'clock, so we can get going. I don't anticipate this training to take too long. It's the last piece of the additional contingencies addendum, which is not as involved, let's say, the inspection contingency. So, and this one is isolated from the offer to purchase itself in that it's not really coupled with anything else in the proper offer like the other two additional contingencies are. So, yeah, it'll open this up for questions afterward if anybody has any. So, getting right into it. Again, I just wanted to always point out where you can find the this document. It's labeled almost identically as the GMIR Addendum A. We do have this in our zip forms packets, but if you kind of hover over the zip forms docs, you can see that it comes up. So it's the Addenda AC right next to the Addendum A.
Yeah, I've gotten quite a few calls from agents saying they can't find it.
Right.
And it's because it starts with Greater Milwaukee Association.
Exactly. I was a little annoyed with how they labeled it, but that's okay. But it is an zip forms packet, so it's right there for you. Getting into the escalation clause itself now.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Can others hear me?
I can hear you, Steph.
Okay. Joni, can you hear me okay, Joan?
Yeah,
You can hear me now. Okay.
I can hear you now.
All right, cool. So the escalation clause language is found on the second page of the addendum AC. And again, I also want to point out with the addendum AC that you can use 1, 2, or 3 of the additional provisions. You don't have to use all 3. Obviously, it's just going to depend on how you are writing your offer and what the buyer wants to do. So you might be writing an offer where you're only doing the inspection threshold or the appraisal gap. You might be doing an offer with all 3. So just a reminder then, depending on what you decide to include, make sure you're checking the box to make sure that you are including the additional provisions. So I'll just go right into the language. If seller accepts this offer and receives 1 or more additional bona fide offers to purchase the property with terms acceptable to the seller, no later than, and you're going to include here the date, the last possible day that they can consider this offer to get bumped. So I worded that very strangely. I'm going to acknowledge that. So generally, this date is lining up with your binding acceptance date. So let's say I write an offer today and the binding acceptance date is tomorrow. I'm communicating to the seller that any offer that you receive between now and tomorrow is up for consideration as it relates to the escalation clause. So if they receive an offer after that date that you write in there, then they can no longer use that offer to bump this offer. So we need to put a timeline on that. So moving on, which results in net proceeds of sale purchase price minus any monetary contributions by the seller, payable to seller equal to or greater than the net proceeds of sale payable to seller under this offer, then the purchase price of this offer shall automatically increase to an amount which generates net proceeds of sale to seller. And then on this line, on line 40, you're going to put in that incremental amount. So, depending on the purchase price or depending on the price point of the property, I've seen this as little as $500. In our higher circles or in our higher price points, I've seen $20,000 increments, $50,000 increments. So it really just depends on the price point. But generally speaking, when we're talking in this, $250,000 to $500,000 range. It's, I see increment amounts of $1,000 to $5,000. So that's also a point that can be of value to the seller, depending on what you write in for the increment amount. In excess of the highest net proceeds of sale generated in such other offers. That line gets really wordy to me, but just know that it's saying that this is where you would put that incremental amount. Line 42 and 43 is a key provision in this escalation clause language. So the purchase price of this offer may be increased once or more than once based on one or more other offers. So that will be a discussion with your buyer on how they want to tailor the offer. But it may be the case, and it may be more advantageous for that seller if the escalation clause has the ability to be bounced more than once. So I'm just going to say that. In our traditional escalation clause language, before we started using this addendum AC, ours was only, we only allowed the ability to have it increased once. There were other escalation clauses out there showing that the purchase price could be escalated more than once. And because of that, the authors of this addendum AC decided to give buyers the choice. And we can show you later examples on how it can be increased more than once. We'll show you how it stops when it's only when we're only given the ability to increase the purchase price once. Moving on line 44 is where you're going to put the buyer's maximum price. So line 44, the purchase price of this offer shall not exceed, and then you're going to put that buyer's max offer price there. 45, if the purchase price of this offer is increased based on one or more other offers, the seller shall, no later than blank days after receipt of said other offers, submit to buyer a signed amendment to the offer reflecting the adjusted purchase price and a copy of any other offers that resulted in and were the basis for the increase to the purchase price of this offer. The original purchase price remains the same if seller does not provide that amendment. So we really like the inclusion of this language. So it states right in there that the seller has to provide that other offer. It also states that the seller must provide that other signed amendment showing the price increase. And it gives a time limit on it. The seller has to do this, email over that evidence with the other offers, email over that amendment no later than 2 days. We also like this because it states who is initiating this amendment, and it is the seller in this case. In previous language, it just left it open. Now we've got it all mapped out for us. And I like that it states that the purchase price just remains the same if the seller fails to provide that amendment. So it also provides the consequence if the seller does not. Again, we like how it's just all mapped out there for us. Line 49, seller or their attorney shall send a bona fide other offer to the buyer's email address at, and then we provide the buyer's email address right in here. Again, on line 52 through 55, it states that we are prohibited as licensed real estate agents from disclosing any of the other terms of another prospective buyer's offer. And so that is why we need to include the buyer's email address so that the seller is emailing that over directly to the buyer, and we are out of it. We're out of that communication. Line 50 to 51, love this as well. Buyer agrees to accept the amendment and deliver it back to the seller according to the delivery terms in this offer and by the deadline for acceptance in the amendment. So again, we've gotten a lot of questions of what happens if the buyer just doesn't want to sign that new amendment with the new purchase price. And it states right in here that the buyer is agreeing to do that. By them including this escalation clause, they are agreeing to accept that amendment and send it back to the seller by the seller's named binding acceptance date. So again, just a lot more clearer in terms of the logistics of the escalation clause and how it is mapped out. But now we'll get to the unclear part with some examples of how they play off of one another and how they can play off of one another in terms of whether or not the purchase price is going to be increased once or more than once. Any questions at this point? Okay. And this is just reiterates what I have just stated. Except I will make a couple more other points. So buyer's agents, just these are kind of just tips for you. When you are going to include an escalation clause, I feel like they're a lot more commonplace now. But call the listing agents ahead of time and just make sure that sellers are comfortable with escalation clauses. There are some agents out there, some sellers out there who are just not even comfortable dealing with them. So it's good practice to just have a conversation with the listing agent. My buyer is considering including an escalation clause. I want to make sure that the seller is comfortable with that. I also want to make sure that you as a listing agent is comfortable with presenting that. Again, I feel like it's a lot more commonplace, and I just still think it's a good courtesy and a good way to build rapport with the listing agents to have that conversation. And you might get the response back, no, don't, highest and best. And so you're working for your buyer in this sense as well. Listing agents have conversations with sellers about escalation clauses ahead of time. Because now the likelihood of you receiving offers with escalation clauses are going to be much higher. I don't know if the appropriate time is at your listing appointments, but I feel, when you're in this listing launch period and you're going to be discussing the types of offers that you're going to be receiving, it's just as much on us as listing agents to have these conversations with our sellers ahead of time and educating them on the types of offers that we're receiving in our market, as it is for buyers agents to be educating their buyers during that buyer consultation period. So get them comfortable with escalation clauses, and just, prepping them for the possibility, the high likelihood of them receiving an offer with an escalation clause. And then just reminding, it's our job to be navigating this through with you and, giving our advice on how we want to treat this once we do receive these offers. Because again, as we get into it, they get pretty messy if more than one offer comes in with an escalation clause. So let's get into that. I'm going to just highlight two areas of concerns, and this is from an attorney and the WRA. We've eliminated this concern for standard form or language with the adoption of the addendum AC. That is why they have issued this, because we do want a standard form and language for all parties, all brokers to be using. Drafting issues, clarity, again, we are past that point now. Juggling multiple offers with escalation clauses and math and inflated values and appraised values. So this is where we're getting into issues now, as before, but these are the remaining areas of concern. It's just can get really confusing. So we do have some ideas for when those confusing offers come in. First of all, though, I've highlighted this example before in Joni and I have in past trainings, but I'm just going to highlight an example that was given to us by a WRA attorney. So we've got three offers here. I'm going to show another example as well. The offer number one is an offer of $235, so base price, initial offer price of $235 with an escalation clause of increment of $1,000 over the highest offer. And you can only adjust it once, so you can only bump once. And the max that the buyer is willing to go up to is $243. We've got another offer, offer number two, no escalation clause, just a straight purchase price of $240. Offer number three is $239 with an escalation of $500 over the highest offer up to $242, and you can adjust it more than once. So right now it shows that we've got the highest offer, initial offer price of $240. With these other offers that have come in, we can maximize this purchase price and get it higher. So the analysis that was given is highest offer of the three on its face is $240. So to maximize the sale price, we're going to add $500 to this offer number two, based off of offer number three's terms, and get to $240,500. From there, we are going to add another $1,000 from offer number one's terms and their escalation clause. And remember, offer number one, you could only escalate once. So now we get a potential purchase price of $241,500. Now, because offer number three, we have the ability to bump that more than once with those $500 increments. We can add another $500 from offer number three and get to $242. Ugly, right? So this is just an example, excuse me, this is just to show you guys how they can play off of one another. And where I want to really press and drive home to you guys is to call Joan and I when you have these kind of scenarios to help with the math, and to help come up with different possibilities for maximizing the purchase price. That being said, well, I'm going to go on to another example as well, just to show you guys how it can play off with two different scenarios. And this was kind of a mimic of a recent example that we had about a week and a half ago, to show you how two offers written two different ways in the escalation clause, and how one was able to beat out the other. And on its face, it seemed like one offer should have won, but moving on. So offer number one, initial offer price of $160 with an escalation clause of $10,000 and can bump once. Max price of $190. The second offer that came in was higher, a higher purchase price, initial purchase price of $167,500 with an escalation clause of increment of $5,000 and can bump more than once with a max price of $185. Now it looks like, with that escalation increment of offer number one of $10,000 and a max price of $190, if you quickly look at those numbers, it seems like offer number one could win out. But what ended up happening was that offer number one turned offer number two into a potential purchase price of $177,500, taking that $10,000 increment and adding it to the $167,500 of offer number two. But now that offer number two had the ability to bump more than once, we were now able to add their $5,000 increment to the $177,500 for a final purchase price of $182,500. Because offer number one only had that incremental amount of $10,000 that, and more importantly, only had the ability to bump once, their final purchase price was only going to be $177,500 if you exercised the escalation clauses. But because number two had the ability to bump more than once, we were able to take that $5,000 and tack it on to that $177,500 and give a higher purchase price of $182,500. So it's meaningful to put in those, to have that discussion on whether or not you want to bump more than once, or not with your buyers.
Yeah, I'd like to add here too, when we wrote our first escalation clause, and every firm was writing their own escalation clauses. We had in there, as Steph said, bumping it only once. And that was mainly because we were all learning this escalation clause and how it worked. And as more and more people started using it, and then the Greater Milwaukee Association of Realtors came out with their standard form of the escalation clause and gave the option of adding more than once to bump. What we've seen is that more and more agents are more familiar with the escalation clause, and the ones that I've been brought into question just to try to figure it out, it turns out that the ones that had the more than once bump were the ones that won. And because it's like the old tennis adage, the ball's in your court.
Mhm.
And when the ball is in your court, you have control. And so if you have the first offer being bumped up to what it's going to be, and now it can trigger the second offer that can go up more than once, the ball's totally in their court. They can decide, if it's still under their max price, to bump it up again.
Yeah.
And in the situations that I've watched over, those were the ones that prevailed.
This offering the second bump seems like it can just create a hot mess.
Yeah. To put it lightly, yeah,
Mhm.
it does.
I mean, like,
So
how are you?
oh,
How do you determine, I guess, just as they come in, how do you determine what the initial first offer is that you start with the bumping?
yeah, you have to, I mean, it's looking at the base prices and the incremental amounts. So but that's going to lead into, and I feel like this is probably your best course of action if you are receiving multiple offers with multiple bump, or multiple offers with escalation clauses that bump more than once. Oh, Sheena, can I have you? Oh, thank you.
I just did it.
Oh, thank you. Consider multiple counter offers. So, and we've had this comment from buyers who have lost out, or buyers agents who have lost out, when they've included escalation clause, kind of regretful of, well, why didn't you just counter us at our highest purchase price, our max price?
Right. Yeah, that seems like the obvious thing to do is like, okay, let's get rid of this mess and just counter
Right.
a price.
Right.
That makes sense.
So we do feel that using a multiple counter offer, sorry, I'm getting work done, and I didn't have an opportunity to get to, hopefully no one can hear it, but using a multiple counter offer form. And another thing that I'm always asking agents is, are there other terms within the, like, besides price, look at other terms. Are there other terms in there that, you could make more beneficial to the seller? Consider using a multiple counter offer. And if you do it, I mean, the fear has always been that if you do a multiple counter, then the other party then has the opportunity to walk away from it altogether, right? And it's just having that confidence in the market, that they're not going to. And
I mean, if they're in a multiple counter situation doing double escalation clauses, obviously they have some skin in the game and want the house.
Exactly. So, and you might even be able to escalate this higher than, you might be able to get over a max price, So just again, having that confidence, and it might be the best thing for your sellers to do that.
Okay,
Trying to
sounds good.
This is also a time to, if you're the listing agent, to reevaluate the comparative price with the seller. Sellers see these dollar signs coming in and far over their listing price or far over what they thought the house was worth. And
Yeah, it
then
still has to
they,
appraise out.
it still has to appraise out. It, you know, if it's financing, it's going to be an appraisal, whether there's an appraisal contingency or not. And you've got to sort of help monitor your sellers so they don't get too greedy. And I
Yeah.
hate to use that word, but
Yeah, no,
they
I
start
just,
seeing
that,
these big
you had
numbers.
4 of these, the math would be a hot mess. I like the multiple count. I'm like, I don't even want to try and figure it out.
Yeah. And then you're eliminating the need for providing the evidence of the other offer. So again, it's just confidence in the market.
Right.
So I did know that, yeah, I figured that was going to take a short amount of time, and we are 26 minutes past the hour. So if anybody has any other just additional, questions on anything, I mean, anything about the addendum AC, a couple weeks ago, Joni did the appraisal gap. Last week, we did the inspection threshold. So any other just questions on the addendum AC at all, or anything really, please go for it.
Steph, I have a quick question.
Yes, Peggy.
If you use the accelerator clause or escalation clause, and you've used 2 offers to get there to that final number, you have to have your seller send both offers, any
Yeah.
offers that you use to get that bump up to the
Absolutely.
buyers.
Yep.
And then we redact the buyers' names on those offers, correct?
You don't technically have to do that because it is the control is giving the control to the seller to email that offer. You don't technically have to redact the seller.
It's just the highest one.
See, I was thinking if you used the lower one as your starting point or your base, that any offer you use to get to your number, you had to send them all of those offers.
Yeah, no, you should. Yes, you do need to send all of the offers that you use to get to that number.
Correct. Not the ones you didn't use, right?
Not the ones you didn't use. But if I'm just saying that you technically don't have to redact the buyer's names. I think it's a courtesy for sure. But because the seller is communicating directly to the buyer, we've already eliminated the concern of sharing information because it's the buyer and seller who are communicating directly.
Got it. And one more quick question then. If you had 2 competing offers that both had multiple times that you can use the accelerator clause, you can just there's no limit to how many times you use it. They can just keep going back and forth until they bump into their max.
Yeah, I mean,
correct?
that's where it doesn't state that it can only be bumped twice or 3 times. It says it's just more than once. So
okay. Just checking, because we've had that situation too.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah,
Thanks.
to me, that's a multiple counter proposal for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, tomorrow during team meeting, I've chosen a topic of confidentiality because we seem to be getting a lot of questions on confidentiality with assigning offers to other people, or in the escalation clause, the confidentiality that the broker is required to meet. It seemed like there were a lot of issues coming up lately that come under the whole term of confidentiality. So I'm just going to quickly try to review that in just a few minutes in the meeting tomorrow. But it's something that we have to be always reminded of. I think with this competitive market, some agents are tempted, not Keller Williams agents, but some other agents are tempted to start sharing terms or prices or things that they are not allowed to do. And it it's something that they could actually lose their license over
Yeah.
if they are found.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to help help each other out in that, just as buyer's agents, and we keep losing out and we're just trying, we're so frustrated, right? And we're just trying to like get an idea of like where we stood, I think that's why that information is being, I know that we know that's why that information is being
Right.
communicated.
And I've had a couple of calls recently too, where the buyers are furious because they lost out and they want to know why they lost out. And that's just a reminder also that confidentiality extends beyond closing. It's always confidential. So you can't go back to the agent that lost out and say, well, this was in the contract and this was in the contract. They will know the price because it becomes public information, but not necessarily the terms. They still always remain confidential. And so you can't say to that buyer's agent who's being pestered by their client, why did we lose out? What was the difference? And some of these buyers can get very demanding about that. But
Yeah.
it's basically, you're not going to say it to their face, but basically it's none of their business.
And another thing that we haven't really like just said, it's plain as day too, but with these escalation clauses, write highest and best. That's another option we haven't even like discussed and from the perspective of a buyer's agent, recalling my comment about how buyer's agents were like, well, why didn't you just counter us back at our max price? Well, let's maybe write our max price too, so there's that option. You don't have to employ the escalation clause.
I think it's so hard though with people like not wanting to, shoot too high.
Yeah.
It's just like throwing spaghetti against the wall right now, it's like,
Yeah.
it's gonna stick.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
Gift of time, half an hour. Go to lead gen.
Thank you.